Good morning. Good morning, welcome. What a beautiful day. I'm Garry Jenkins, the president of Bates, and I just want to say welcome to everyone. I am so pleased to be here with you in community on this important day for Bates and for our country. This is my first Martin Luther King Jr. Day at Bates, and it's something that I've heard a lot about and have been looking forward to, and it's wonderful to see you all here. Whether you've walked across campus or joined us from across town or are participating virtually, I'm so pleased that you're here today. Now, as most of you know, it is a Bates tradition to gather each year at this time to honor the life, legacy, and essential work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. These commemorations are made possible only by the hard work of many, including, first and foremost, our MLK Day Planning Committee. And this year, that committee was led by Tyler Harper and Justin Moriarty. So let's give them and the entire committee a round of applause. I also want to thank all those who designed and proposed a panel or a workshop or a presentation or event, along with all of you who will participate in today's rich series of offerings. It really will be a glorious day. The theme of this year's observance is food justice. And we are very fortunate to be joined today by an expert on the theme, a chef, an activist, an author, Bryant Terry, who will be more fully introduced in a few moments, but welcome, Bryant. First, yes, we can clap now and again. First, I'd like to briefly reflect on this year's theme. While food justice may feel like a modern-day concern or a contemporary formulation of a civil rights issue, Dr. King himself was explicitly focused on issues of food justice. Speaking in Montgomery, Alabama in 1965, he said, "Let us march on poverty until no American parent has to skip a meal so that their children may eat." And then earlier, speaking at Spelman College, another leading liberal arts college, in 1960, he said the following: "I do believe that in America, we must use our vast resources of wealth to bridge the gulf between abject, deadening poverty and superfluous, inordinate wealth. God has left enough space in this universe for all of his children to have the basic necessities of life. If the United States is to survive, along with all the citizens of the world, we must come out of this mountain of practical materialism, which can be transformed from a legitimate individualism into a rugged individualism, and we must move out of that into a proper concern for all humanity and into a proper concern for every individual." So King is asking us to pause for a moment on the idea of what are the basic necessities of life, such as food, which are out of reach to some, even in a nation as wealthy as ours. This, he suggests, should be untenable, should be unimaginable to all of us. What he's talking about is in many ways food justice by another name. Here we find King focusing our attention, as he so often did, with a really capacious understanding of justice, of a justice that's not just an abstract idea, but is also a lived reality with real and tangible meaning for the very existence of our neighbors and our fellow citizens. He forces the recognition that what so many of us in this country are able to take for granted is beyond reach or power for many of those around us, whether we're talking here in the United States or in the wider world. So it's good, it's right then, that we should take up these ideas, this question of food justice as our MLK Day theme for 2024. And I thank you all for being a part of it, for being part of the commemoration, being part of the work, being part of the change. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our student member of the MLK Committee, Phoebe Stern, class of 2024.
Good morning, everyone. It is such an honor to stand here in front of you all today and to get to share a few thoughts. Food justice is a topic that is very close to my heart. I'm currently writing my thesis on the intersection of Jewish dietary laws and environmental sustainability. I won't bore you with the details, but here's a quick summary. Dietary laws were written thousands of years ago as a way to direct an individual's eating habits towards sacrality. However, these laws do not account for the changing conditions that define modern agriculture, such as GMOs, factory farming, workers' rights, or land ownership, to name a few. The list goes on, but in short, there is no way that the people from thousands of years ago could have imagined the world that we live in today. Therefore, we must adapt old dietary laws to our modern climate to honor the same principles while engaging with the current climate crisis. Kosher laws are a bit more niche, but this principle can and should be applied to food justice. Our world is constantly changing, and we cannot predict what agriculture and farming will look like in the coming years, decades, or centuries. Therefore, it is up to us to use our knowledge and to continue to guide our planet towards a brighter future. It is crucial that we must think about food systems and food justice in a holistic manner so as not to perpetuate inequities. I'm so excited about the theme food justice, as food is an integral part of our existence. Therefore, it is an issue that all of us can relate to on a personal level. It is essential to understand the broad impact of something that so many of us take for granted. Food justice works its way into all aspects of our life, from a religious studies thesis to on a farm, and exploring this issue through many forms of expression, from academic studies to hands-on work in a kitchen. I'm so excited for a day full of learning. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you this morning. My name is Tyler Harper. I'm an assistant professor of environmental studies and co-chair of the MLK committee. Our keynote presentation will begin in just a few minutes, followed, as is customary, by a day of workshops and events dedicated to the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., to the spirit of his work and legacy. Before introducing this year's speaker, however, I'd like to say a few words about our theme, food and food justice, and I'll begin with an anecdote. In December 1964, a 35-year-old Dr. King traveled to Norway, where he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in the civil rights movement. In his acceptance speech, the Reverend called out the great evils of his era: the police dogs and fire hoses, the bombed churches of the American South, the everyday cruelties of life lived in the twilight of Jim Crow, but also the Cold War and its anxieties, the proxy conflicts abroad, the looming specter of nuclear annihilation. Yet even in the face of this pervasive brutality, King's commitment to nonviolence remained unwavering. I'm struck by one passage of his speech in particular. I refuse to accept the cynical notion that nation after nation must spiral down a militaristic hell into the militaristic hell, into the hell of thermonuclear destruction, King declared. I believe that even amid today's mortar bursts and whining bullets, there is still hope for a brighter tomorrow. I believe that wounded justice, lying prostrate on the blood-flowing streets of our nations, can be lifted from the dust of shame to reign supreme among the children of men. I have the audacity to believe that people everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity and equality for their spirits. Here, King lays bare the realities of his violent decade, but even as he invokes war, and indeed a possible nuclear war to end all wars, he emphasized that the struggle is not just for peace, but for a good life for all. King invokes bombs, but he makes time for bread. And he is clear that before education and before equality and before even freedom, there must first be food. The right not to be hungry is more than a human right. In some basic sense, it is a necessary precondition for every right. We cannot learn if we are hungry. We cannot be fully free if we have nothing to eat. Dr. King's Nobel speech is a reminder that even as our politics feel fraught and perhaps broken, we must not lose sight of the most basic: who has food and who does not. King's time was a time of war, and so too is our own. To that end, I'd like to address what may feel like the elephant in the room given King's legacy of anti-war activism, the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. A group of dedicated faculty, staff, and students have spent the last several months working to put together a series of film screenings, speakers, and events focused on Israel-Palestine that will take place this winter, starting in February. There are no official MLK events related to the war, and this is because the committee didn't feel like a single workshop, particularly one cobbled together at the last minute as would be necessary, could possibly do justice to the complexities of Israel-Palestine. We of course understand that the conflict may become a topic of conversation on campus today, and we trust that those conversations will unfold with the good faith, grace, and respect for open inquiry that characterizes the Bates community. As I conclude my remarks this morning, I'd like to extend a thank you to everyone who has made this day possible, including my co-chair, Justin Moriarty, as well as the professors and students who help organize this event. However, I'd like to thank the staff members on MLK in particular. Although I'm the one standing up here this morning, it is not the faculty, but the staff who are the lifeblood of the MLK committee. It is a cruel but constant irony in life that often the most important work is the least visible, and that is certainly true here, so thank you all very much. We have an exciting and enriching day ahead of us, and that begins with our keynote presentation. Our keynote speaker this morning is Bryant Terry, a vegan chef and activist, an artist and historian, and a champion of sustainable food systems. He has won both a James Beard Award and an NAACP Image Award, and is the author of a number of popular cookbooks, most recently Black Food, Stories, Art, and Recipes. I know I speak for the entire Bates community when I say that I'm absolutely thrilled to have Bryant with us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bryant. Thank you all very much.
Margie, my maternal grandmother, kept a cupboard in her kitchen that was about, okay, sorry. I'm gonna hold my laptop. My maternal grandmother kept a cupboard in her kitchen that was about 7 feet tall and a foot deep, each shelf crowded with glass jars full of preserves, pickled pears, peaches, carrots and green beans, figs, blackberry jam, sauerkraut, and her not-to-be-forgotten chow chow. Cabbage, onions, peppers, chopped finely, cooked for about 5 hours, and served as a relish along with leafy greens such as collards, mustards, turnips, kale, dandelions. Listen, my grandmother could work magic in the kitchen. You knew she was cooking whenever you entered her house, even if you didn't smell it, because you'd always hear singing. Glory, glory, hallelujah, when I lay my burden down, no more Monday, no more Tuesday, when I lay my burden down. Whenever she wrote it, thank you. Whenever she rolled out the dough for her fried pies, it felt like her love and connection to spirit were being folded along with the flour, salt, butter, and water. I've been sharing this, my favorite food memory, since I started presenting publicly about health, food, and farming issues about 20 years ago. My work has always had the texture of autobiography, and it's important that I ground all my practices in history and memory. My fondest recollections of being in the kitchen involve spending time with my maternal grandmother, from whom I gained a love of cooking. But most of the lessons that I learned as a child about the ways that my ancestors cultivated food came from spending time with my paternal grandfather, Andrew Johnson Terry, in its backyard urban farm in Memphis, Tennessee. His family, who had farms in rural Mississippi, passed down their agrarian knowledge, connection to the land, emphasis on self-determination, and practices of generosity, community care, and mutual aid to meet the immediate needs of neighbors and the wider community. I give thanks to my grandparents for laying the foundation for the work that I've done for more than 2 decades. I also give thanks to the MLK Planning Committee, the dining conferences, campus events team, and President Jenkins, and to all of you for gathering here today. I'm deeply honored to be presenting on this MLK Day. I've had the privilege of delivering MLK keynotes at various institutions, including Yale, Willamette University, UC Santa Cruz, and others. So I've thought a lot about Dr. King's legacy over the past decade or so. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I've been thinking about him even more over the past 3 months, and I've wondered what his response would be to recent geopolitical events. Dr. King has always been an influential presence in my life, especially growing up in Memphis, Tennessee, where he was tragically assassinated at the Lorraine Hotel on April 4th, 1968. The older generation in Memphis carried a profound sense of guilt, feeling that they had allowed this tragedy to happen in their town. My grandparents often expressed their sadness and regret about his loss. Consequently, I felt a personal responsibility to carry on Dr. King's legacy, and this sense of purpose has guided my life's work, particularly in striving to create a more healthful, just, and sustainable food system. Now, you might be wondering, and I joke with Tyler, I said, Dr. Jenkins is about to steal all my talking points, but thank you. I like to think you teed them up for me, Dr. Jenkins. You might be wondering, what does Dr. King's legacy have to do with food justice? To quote Dr. Tyler Harper, Assistant Professor of Environmental Studies here at Bates, in a world plagued by environmental disasters, economic inequality, war, and rapid technological change, food is also inseparable from questions of justice, and I wholeheartedly agree. While Dr. King is often remembered for his leadership in the civil rights movement, it's equally important to acknowledge his radical legacy. Dr. King was a staunch advocate for economic justice, condemning poverty and wealth inequality, which he saw as intertwined with racial injustice. Towards the end of his life, he spoke of the triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism as forms of violence that fed into a vicious cycle. The King Center reminds us that these 3 evils are interconnected, all-encompassing, and serve as barriers to building the beloved community. In a recent newsletter from Food First, an NGO dedicated to eliminating injustices causing hunger, they underscored Dr. King's understanding that access to and affordability of healthy food are fundamental human rights essential for securing freedoms. During his 1966 visit to Mississippi to support Black voter registration, he addressed the harsh realities of hunger and malnutrition faced by all communities denied economic opportunities. He stressed, quote, "There are 40 million poor people here, not just Blacks, but poor whites and Puerto Ricans, illuminating the universality of these issues." Dr. King highlighted and worked to address many of the injustices that persist today as root causes of hunger and poverty. He believed in wage equality, wage equity, and workers' rights, emphasizing the importance of a living wage rather than just a minimum wage. Additionally, he recognized the systemic forces behind hunger and poverty, critiquing the capitalist pursuit of profits over human needs. Dr. King called for a revolution of values, urging society to transition from being a thing-oriented to a person-oriented society. And I believe that Dr. King would agree with my sentiment that food justice goes beyond advocacy and direct service and calls for organized responses to food apartheid driven by those most impacted by food injustice. And I just want to define this term, food apartheid, because I think many of us have heard the term food desert. By show of hands, in fact, how many of you have heard this term food desert? So as I was explaining, we were having a conversation with the young brothers from Morehouse who will be presenting at the debate later today, that this term has largely been supplanted by food, the term food desert has largely been supplanted by the term food apartheid. Food desert almost makes these economic realities, the kind of economic, physical, geographic barriers that many communities face seem natural, but food apartheid refers to the systemic and structural inequalities in the food system, resulting in some communities having limited access to healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food, while others have more abundant access. It underscores that unequal access to nutritious food is rooted in historical and ongoing injustices, including racial and economic disparities. One aspect of Dr. King's legacy that is often overlooked is how he dressed to connect with working Americans, which I understand as an intentional performative aspect of his activism. An article by David Shook highlights that denim had a bitter connection for many Black Americans in the 50s and 60s. Despite the images of civil rights activists in immaculate suits and dresses at protests and boycotts, the majority of Black people in the post-war American South lived in poverty and worked in manual labor jobs, and these jobs required workwear. So when I think about this kind of performative aspect of King's work as related to the kind of artistic thread throughout my work, it's very important to uplift and highlight this, and I hope that someone writes about and does more work about this. When Dr. King was in the American South to advance the voting rights of Black Americans, he abandoned tailored suits for jeans and overalls to better connect with everyday people. And on the screen is an iconic image of Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy wearing matching denim work pants and work shirts when they were arrested in Birmingham, Alabama in April of 1963, an arrest that would lead to his iconic letter from a Birmingham jail. This choice of attire underscored Dr. King's commitment to empathizing with and relating to the struggles of everyday Americans, especially those in manual labor jobs, and it symbolized his dedication to the causes of justice and equality for all. So I'd like to discuss the trajectory of my journey as a food justice activist, a community builder, a chef, an author, and an artist, highlighting how my work has seamlessly integrated creativity, culture, and social impact for more than 2 decades. And I aim to provide insights into what I described as a non-sectarian approach to addressing questions that I had over 2 decades ago, including how can historically marginalized communities be empowered to take ownership and lead in addressing food apartheid? How will climate change exacerbate food insecurity among our most vulnerable populations? What lessons can we learn from healthy soil and compost? And how do they remember and teach us? Most important, how can I inspire us all to strive for a healthier, fairer, and more sustainable food system? But before delving into my own work, I want to discuss 2 major influences that compelled me to become a food justice activist. And by becoming a food justice activist, I mean becoming the most self-righteous, dogmatic, judgmental vegan that you've ever encountered. I don't know if you guys have ever dealt with someone who has a vegan diet and they are the most self-righteous, finger-wagging nanny. That was me. And I apologize to my parents almost every week for putting them through hell for several years because of my zeal. Anyway. Pictured here is a seminal hip-hop group, Boogie Down Productions, known for adeptly weaving social and political issues into their music. Their song, Beef, from the album Edutainment, brilliantly elucidates how industrialized food systems brutalizes animals, adversely affects individual and public health, and financially incentivizes corporations to perpetuate these violent and unethical practices. Thank you. So I'll kick some lyrics from this song. Beef, what a relief. When will this poisonous product cease? This is another public service announcement. You can believe it or you can doubt it. Let us begin now with the cow, the way that it gets to your plate and how. The cow doesn't grow fast enough for man, so through his greed, he creates a faster plan. He has drugs to make the cow grow quicker. Through the stress, the cow gets sicker. 21 different drugs are pumped into the cow in one big lump, and just before it dies, it cries in a slaughterhouse full of germs and flies. I'll stop there because it gets much more graphic. Shortly thereafter, I came across The Jungle, a narrative fiction work by Upton Sinclair in which he exposes the appalling working conditions and unsanitary state of the meatpacking industry in Chicago. Surprisingly, it wasn't a scholarly monograph or a lofty intellectual lecture that profoundly reshaped my habits, attitudes, and political views concerning food. It was a song and a novel. When I reflect on the profound impact of Upton Sinclair, a journalist and a creative writer, and KRS-One, an MC, on the trajectory of my life, I recognize them as catalysts for social change. They, along with numerous artists, storytellers, media creators, and cultural influencers, became role models for how I approach food justice activism. As a graduate student in history, my research on radical movements of the 60s and 70s led me to survival programs of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Among their more than 60 programs designed to address the basic needs of historically marginalized communities, two stood out in programmatically addressing the intersection of poverty, malnutrition, and institutional racism, their grocery giveaways, and their free breakfast for children program. Additionally, I found profound inspiration in the artwork of Emory Douglas, the Black Panther Party's Minister of Culture. My foundation for understanding cooking as a political act was shaped by reading of historian Dr. Robin D.G. Kelly's second monograph, Race Rebels. And Dr. Kelly was my advisor when I was a PhD student in history at NYU. In this work, Dr. Kelly delves into the methods of resistance employed by the Black working class in the 20th century to combat capitalism and white supremacy. These methods included slowdowns, theft, leaving work early, and quitting. While the food justice movement engages in organized forms of resistance, I believe it's equally vital to recognize and celebrate seemingly apolitical acts, such as growing food, preparing meals from scratch, and fostering community around our dining tables as profoundly political, dare I say radical, acts of resistance. These corporations, the multinational, the handful of multinational corporations that largely control our food system, invest billions of dollars to persuade us to buy food from corporate-owned supermarkets, dine at fast food chains, and consume our meals hastily so we can swiftly return to work. I celebrate these everyday acts of resistance and view them as accessible entry points into the food justice movement for everyday people. While I was attending culinary school in New York City, I founded Be Healthy, a community-based organization with a mission to utilize cooking as a transformative tool for educating and empowering young people residing in neighborhoods affected by food apartheid. Our primary objective was to equip these young people with the knowledge and agency to lead efforts aimed at increasing access to healthful, just, and culturally appropriate food within their communities. In addition to imparting culinary skills and offering training in community organizing, we collaborated with local artists and engaged with our young participants. Together, they worked to create visual counter-narratives that challenged the billions of dollars spent by multinational corporations to promote unhealthy food and beverages. Our aim was to empower these youth to resist the influence of these corporations and make healthier choices. I subsequently authored several groundbreaking books that seamlessly blend recipes, narrative, music, art. My most recent work, Black Food, stands as a testament to collaboration, uniting 100 creatives from the African diaspora to share our collective stories. I've collaborated with artists to draw attention to our most pressing issues and propose solutions. In this series, I partnered with Oakland-based artist Fabiano Rodriguez to craft posters shedding light on the profound impact of structural racism on the well-being of Black and brown communities. And these posters also celebrate gardening and cooking as everyday acts of resistance. As a chef in residence at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, I develop public programs that place people of color at the forefront, emphasizing themes such as food justice, climate justice, postpartum justice, and more. Around 2001, I began attending numerous national gatherings aimed at addressing the issues within our broken food system. However, I was consistently troubled by a few recurring issues I encountered. These gatherings were predominantly attended by privileged white people, and those who suffered the most from our flawed food system were often absent from the discussions. I strongly believe that exploited migrant farm workers, individuals residing in both rural and urban areas affected by food apartheid, and others who bore the brunt of our food system's injustices should have been leading these conversations. I understood that true food justice activism extended beyond mere advocacy and direct service, emphasizing the need for organized responses to food injustice led by communities most affected. Additionally, I couldn't help but notice the presence of educational and class biases within these gatherings. The conversations often initiated with discussions of public policy and high-level intellectual concepts, yet they lacked the essential elements of art, culture, and a focus on community. During that time, I adopted a mantra that I continue to repeat: start with the visceral to ignite the cerebral, and end with the political. This mantra underscores the importance of beginning discussions with tangible sensory experiences, which can then stimulate discourse, ultimately leading to concrete community and political action. During last academic year, I had the privilege of being invited to join the second cohort of the Abolition Democracy Fellows at UC Berkeley. This fellowship provided me with the time and space to embark on a project I had contemplated for years. Inspired by the data visualizations created by scholar W.E.B. Du Bois for the exhibit of American Negroes at the Paris exhibition of 1900, I breathed life into compelling raw data concerning health, food, and farming issues. This was achieved through a series of research-based mixed media works. This is actually a kind of thumbnail of the first in this series, focusing on the stark decline of Black farmers over the 20th century. As depicted around 1920, we were nearing 1 million Black farmers. By 1997, this figure had plummeted to fewer than 20,000. Presently, Black farmers constitute less than 2% of the total farm operators in the United States. It is essential for us all to be incensed, I would argue, by this reality and the structural forces responsible for it. What's even more distressing is that Black farmers continue to face obstacles to success due to the openly racist policies within the USDA, which persistently denies them loans, subsidy payments, and other forms of assistance needed to sustain their businesses. Furthermore, Black farmers endure racial terror at the hands of white supremacists. And I don't know if this was a big story in the West Coast in the February of 2023, but there were reports that emerged about Courtney and Nicole Mallory, a Black farming couple in El Paso County, Colorado, who had been subjected to terrorizing acts by local white individuals, including threats with firearms, vehicular harassment, and the poisoning of their livestock. As I mentioned earlier, the fellowship afforded me the mental space to reconsider the evolution of the body of work I've been cultivating over the past 2 decades, and it's also provided me with the physical space to explore various art practices. In response to an enduring question that has guided my work for over 20 years, what is our medicine? I'm in the process of creating the Sacred Larder, a sculptural installation and social practice project. The surge in chronic illnesses among Black people during the 20th century can be attributed to a complex interplay of social, economic, and systemic factors. Nevertheless, it is well understood that access to nutritious food plays a crucial role in preventing chronic illnesses. The decline of Black farmers may have indeed contributed to the scarcity of fresh, locally grown, and culturally relevant foods in Black communities. Drawing inspiration from the traditional food preservation techniques practiced by African Americans and influenced by my maternal grandmother's well-stocked pantry in her South Memphis kitchen, I embarked on the preservation of African American staple foods such as okra, black-eyed peas, and sweet potatoes, utilizing ingredients sourced from 3 Black farmers in Northern California, and I employed techniques including pickling, salting, and dehydrating to fill a larder with ball canning jars containing staple foods of the African diaspora, our historical medicine. The social aspect of this project extends to an invitation to Black community members to contribute to the pantry, which is currently under construction, by preserving their own family-favorite traditional Black staples using the aforementioned techniques. So lastly, I'd like to present a series of photos related to my latest project, a sculptural work titled Raised Bed Number 2, and that's R-A-Z-E-D, bed number 2. I like that. These images feature inspiring artists, process photos, and a first draft of a set of mixed media drawings that will accompany my sculpture. The collection of these images is an integral part of my creative journey as they help me gather input that will eventually find its way into the final work, and I hope they provide insight into my creative process. I'm gonna give them the cue. I'll actually be playing, kind of sliding through these images without comment, but I'll be playing a song that I created with my bandmate, Joshua Gabriel, a Brooklyn-based producer, and this song features a sample of my mother in her kitchen in Huntsville, Alabama, cooking while embodying my maternal grandmother, singing a song that my grandmother would often sing. But before we play the song, I just want to give you a little context about this latest work. My artistic inquiry navigates through the complex landscapes of institutional and systemic oppression with a particular focus on health, nutrition, and agriculture. This journey is anchored in highlighting the persistent reliance and resilience and agency of Black communities against the backdrop of these entrenched structural challenges. My work not only explores historical resilience strategies, but also envisages future paradigms that foster cultural empowerment, self-reliance, and collective nurturing. Raised Bed Number 2 is a sculptural piece in my oeuvre, is a conscious deviation from traditional minimalism, embracing both simplicity and profound subjectivity, utilizing a restrained material palette, geometric abstraction, and monochromatic tones. It weaves a poignant narrative. This narrative etched into the blackened wood and charred edges, embodying the vestiges of racial capitalism and colonial legacies, while simultaneously engaging with contemporary issues such as racial plagiarism, food apartheid, gentrification, climate crisis, and the geopolitical turmoil of 2023 into 2024. The sculpture's upper stratum, comprising soil, compost, and heirloom collared seeds, underscores the vitality and sanctity of these materials. They're not mere substances, but living, sacred elements that impart sustenance and wisdom. This aspect of the work invites contemplation on how nurturing soil, practicing composting, and growing food can catalyze transformative impacts on ecosystems, communities, and individual consciousness. And this installation extends into an immersive experience with accompanying mixed media drawings and a video component, offering a window into the creative genesis of Raised Bed Number 2 and elucidating the intricate interplay between the finished object and the painstaking process of making it. So I'm currently in the studio actually making the sculpture, so I don't have images of the finished sculpture, but you will see a cardboard model that I created back in September that gives you a sense of what the final sculpture will look like. And just for scale, it's actually gonna be about 7 feet tall. So we can go ahead and cue up the music.
since I laid my burden down. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Since I laid my burden down, I feel better, so much better. Since I laid my burdens down, I feel better, so much better. Since I laid my burdens down.
All right. So thank you for going on that intellectual and creative journey with me. And I will be concluding this presentation with a cooking demonstration. Now, inspired by my mentor, Alice Waters, I don't believe in just talking about food without having the sensual pleasures of the table present. And one of the things that really drew me to the culinary arts and making the decision to go to cooking school was that I understood that our industrialized food system has taken the practice of cooking away from so many of us. You know, this practice that in generations before was passed down is something that so many of us don't have the privilege of learning from our elders. Our industrialized food system, our fast food culture, our processed packaged convenience society that we live in, there's very little incentive for many of us to practice cooking. And so it's one of the reasons that I started writing cookbooks. I believe that if I imparted fundamental cooking skills, it would empower people, especially young people, to get into the kitchen, to think about ways that they can practically employ, something like, as I mentioned in my talk, we might see these things as apolitical. Cooking, growing food from scratch, gathering around the table. But I argue that these are highly political in our industrialized food system. And I think that, cooking skills are something that we should all understand is integral to not only kind of healing the earth, but also having a healthier diet. There's a growing body of research that the more we cook at home, the more healthful our actual diet is. And so this recipe is from my book, Afro-Vegan, which is a collection of food recipes that really explore and celebrate foods throughout the African diaspora through the lens of plant-based cooking. And, one might argue that, or people might believe, vegan cooking, that's kind of this, modern thing that you're imposing on this traditional diet. But even if we trace, looking at the diets in West and Central Africa, many of the traditional diets, these are largely vegetable-based. And while the kind of popular imagination of Black food is the kind of deep-fried meats and overcooked vegetables and sugary desserts, these are the kind of stereotypical ways in which many people understand Black food. But in terms of the traditional ways that African Americans grew food, cook it, and ate it, these are like, if you think about the staples of Black cuisine, collards, mustards, turnips, kale, dandelions, black-eyed peas, sugar snap peas, pole beans, butternut squash. These are the kind of staples that any Western-trained allopathic physician or nutritionist or dietitian should say we should all be eating. So inspired by this West African concept of Sankofa, which is looking backwards as we move forward, I would argue that this body of work that I've created is really forcing us to pull back, to think about these traditional food ways and how we can incorporate them into a modern context. So the recipe that I'm making is, it's a tofu curry with mustard greens. And it's actually inspired by a Tanzanian dish that I learned from a friend. And I love this recipe for a number of reasons. One, while this uses tofu, I am very clear that I think there's a lot of dogmatism when it comes to diet, as I mentioned earlier, and I think that diet is a very individual choice. We all need to think about our own bodily constitution, our health status, our age. There are a number of factors that should play into what we're eating. And it may be perfect for you to have one specific diet at a moment in your life, but we need to listen to our body and think about the way in which it's constantly changing and shifting, and really check in with our health team about how we might want to shift our diet to meet its needs accordingly. But the thing I like about this recipe is that you can easily substitute whatever protein source you might want to add. So say you like chicken, you want to add lamb, you can add this to the dish. So I do use tofu, which is a protein source that's predominant in a lot of vegetarian and vegan cooking. I do argue that it's often overused, and I rebuke the boring and kind of like stereotypical way in which people just, delete meat and add tofu. Where there once was a steak, now I'm gonna have a big block of tofu and brown sauce. We're not doing that here. In fact, I often avoid using things like tofu and only use it in the way that it might be used traditionally in Asian cooking, very sparingly. But this is one of those dishes where I employ a technique of roasting tofu, which gives it a lot of kind of meatiness and bite. And cooked in the right way, it actually can be very tasty and filling, because that's one of the complaints that a lot of people have with a plant-based diet is I just, how can you get enough protein? How can you feel full if you aren't including animal products? I think there is kind of a overestimation of the amount of protein that we need in an American diet. I think you can get protein from a lot of sources, legumes, and protein is in different grains. But for this recipe, we are going to use tofu. And the way that I actually prepare the tofu, which I'm not going to do here on stage, obviously because we're not in a demo kitchen, is simply roasting it. And the technique involves preheating an oven to 350 degrees, lining a baking sheet with parchment paper, taking the tofu, tossing it in a little olive oil, salting it, and then placing it on the baking sheet and roasting it for about 30 minutes. I probably check on it every 10 minutes or so just to turn it to ensure even cooking. And what that yields is a very crispy, kind of golden exterior and this creamy interior. So really delicious. As I mentioned, feel free to substitute whatever makes sense for you. Before I get into the recipe itself, though, I do want to talk a little bit about the benefits of making stock. First of all, let me ask this. How many people in here actually cook? Do we have any people cooking? Okay. You guys are all gourmands. Is this below your, should I just stop this now? You guys have this already. Do I even need to do this cooking demonstration? Okay. So, I do want to talk about the benefits of stock. Now, having gone to culinary school, for some reason, there was this kind of psychological barrier to me making my own homemade stock, and then it just clicked one day. I will say that we're at a point now where you can get a lot of really good quality and tasty vegetarian and vegan boxed and bottled stocks, even vegetarian and vegan bouillon cubes. So I'm not as self-righteous and stuck up about using those things as I was a decade ago. But the thing about stock that you make at home, first of all, it's super easy to do, but it's pretty incomparable in terms of the cleanness and freshness of flavor. In fact, my wife and I make a big vat of vegetable stock every weekend. And what we do is we make the stock, we cool it down, we transfer it to ice cube trays, freeze those, and then we'll transfer the trays to Ziploc bags, because obviously for a soup or a stew or something of this nature, the stock makes sense, but anything that requires water, if you're making rice or quinoa or some type of grain, you can substitute the rice or the water with stock to give it more flavor and a little more depth. Now, when making stock, simple ingredients: a couple of carrots, a few onions, a head of garlic, and you don't even need to peel the onions. You could simply quarter them. The garlic, I would say, open it up with the butt of your hand, maybe take a butt of a knife just to kind of smash the different garlic, cloves. What else? Some mushrooms, if you want the stock to have a little bit more umami and depth, maybe a little bit of, bay leaves. So we add all those ingredients, and there are a number of stocks you can make. In the wintertime, I do more of what I call a rich stock, when I take the vegetables, toss them in oil, roast them for about an hour. That way they have like more depth and sweetness, and so that might be for more winter stews and tagines and things of that nature. But take the vegetables, add about 2 quarts of water, bring it to a boil, lower the boil to a simmer, partially cover it, let it cook for about half an hour, sometimes up to an hour and a half if you really want to like extract all the nutrients. And then you simply transfer it to a colander, press the solids, and you have this rich, flavorful, delicious stock. So make stocks at home if you can. The first thing I do with this recipe, so here's the thing. We could talk about curries and the kind of problematic nature of this term. This spice blend that is seen in a lot of South Asian cooking and places in the South Asian diaspora is simply a melange of different spices. Now, I often get, one of the main pieces of feedback that I get about my cookbook writing is that they're time intensive and they're labor intensive. People feel like, oh my God, Brian, I have to make 3 recipes within a recipe just to get the final dish. And the reason that this plays out is because I'm an advocate for slow food and slow cooking. Now, I realize that this type of cooking practices may not be convenient during the week, but one of the things that our kind of fast food culture has done is just, it always has us on the go. It always has us thinking about how quickly we can do things. And I encourage us to slow down. These recipes are the type of things that I would say you want to make on the weekend. Not only, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say this, I think capitalism often has us convinced that we have to address any problem that we have individually. I'm really pushing for a more communal way of understanding how we address larger systemic problems, but even the kind of everyday issues that we might have. So I want to encourage you to think about how you can connect with friends, family, and community to make food. So yes, it may be cost prohibitive for you to go to the farmer's market and buy a lot of fresh ingredients and get a lot of spices and herbs, but imagine this. What if everyone in this front row got together on the weekend and we went to Dr. Jenkins's kitchen, which has this amazing, wolf range and lots of equipment. And then, we went to the farmer's market. We all pooled our money and collectively bought ingredients. We come back, we make a range of dishes together. Then we have fresh, delicious, home-cooked dishes that we've made together that we can divvy among the group. Many of them we can freeze, and we have fresh food that we can eat throughout the week. And not only that, we're building community. We've gone to the farmer's market and we've supported the local farmers instead of the multinational supermarkets. The farmers that we're supporting at the farmer's market get up to 90 cents on every dollar that we spend. And we're ensuring that we're supporting those who are growing food with integrity, with an eye toward sustainability, and with care for everyday eaters like you and me. So my plug to think about how we can collectively feed ourselves and not just do it for our individual selves or our nuclear family. Are you guys feeling me on that? Are you guys gonna practice that? You guys gonna work on that? Tell your parents to do it too. So the first thing that I do with this blend is I'm gonna add mustard seeds. And the thing about a blend like this, going back to the kind of labor-intensive way in which I think about recipes. Of course, you could probably go to any conventional supermarket and get a curry spice blend, right? But the thing about making these blends yourself is that, one, you can customize it to make it fit for your own tastes and desires. Say you like a little bit more ginger, or you want a little bit more heat. You can add more chili or cayenne or add more ginger. I do recommend, if you can, when using fresh spices, to get the whole spices instead of the pre-ground ones. As much as my mother likes to cook, I don't know why she has this drawer at home that has spices in there from like the 1970s. I'm like, Jesus Christ, Mom, just clean this drawer out, right? Because the spices are dead at this point. So the thing about getting fresh spices is that, when you get whole spices like cumin seeds, for example, instead of the ground, it's just gonna be much more fresh and lively, and that's going to contribute to a fresh and lively dish. When you take the the whole spices, and then you heat them in a skillet, it wakes them up. It brings out the natural oils, and it's just going to add to an overall dish. So I always say that, one of the cornerstones of good vegetarian and vegan and plant-based cooking is using fresh, like really good quality spices. It's going to add so much to the dish. So when using them, add them to the skillet, wake them up. You can get a mortar and pestle and you can grind them, or you can get a clean coffee grinder and grind them. And so it's going to add a lot to the dish. That being said, I understand that that may not be convenient, and you certainly can use pre-ground spices instead. Now, if you have the resources, if there are places, co-ops, or conventional markets that have bulk spices, then I would suggest getting them in smaller quantities so that you can use them. Because the thing about these spices is they lose a lot of their punch as time goes by. So within like 6 months or a year, they're gonna be less fresh than they would have been 6 months prior. So we have our mustard seeds in here, and as soon as they start to pop, that means that we're ready to move to the next step, which is adding our onions and a little bit of olive oil, being one of the healthier fats. And so I'm simply gonna saute this over medium-low heat. And we don't need to caramelize these. We can cook these for maybe 3 or 4 minutes until the onions are translucent, and then that's gonna take us exactly where we need to be. So our onions are cooking. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the spice blend. We have some cardamom, which is a staple spice used in South Asian cooking. We have a little onion powder, ginger powder, some turmeric, chili powder, garlic, black pepper, and some fresh ginger. So the next thing I want to do is add our minced garlic. And you don't want to cook that too long. You just want to cook it just until it starts to smell fragrant, which will let you know that it's ready to go. I do want to offer you this as a tip. If you're ever having a gathering in which food is present, as soon as your guests start to come to the house, get you a skillet, combine olive oil and a little garlic, get you one of these oscillating fans, and then just let that garlic essence permeate your house. It always impresses people. You could be having a dessert buffet and people are like, oh my God, garlic. So highly recommend that. Once our garlic is smelling fragrant, we could just start dumping and stirring our ingredients. So our cardamom powder, our garlic, our ginger powder, our turmeric. So we want to stir these as we're mixing them. Our chili. And I'm going to save the black pepper, but I am going to add our ginger. And we want to stir this quickly because spices will burn. So make sure you get those incorporated. And this is an important stage at which you add the spices, because what you don't want to do, and I'm going to add this, our tomatoes while I'm talking this through. You don't want to let the garlic or the spices burn. And so you just want to cook them just until they start to smell fragrant. And you want to add them at this stage where you have your alliums, your garlic, and your onions, because what you want to avoid when making a soup or a stew is dumping in spices into this big vat of liquid, because it's going to prevent the spices from fully incorporating, and what it'll do is just they're going to clump up in there. So when you cook them with your alliums, it coats them, and then it ensures that they're evenly distributed throughout the dish. So as you see, I am just kind of moving things around while scraping the bottom of the pan, and we added some canned tomatoes. Now you might be saying, Bryant, I wouldn't expect you to use canned tomatoes. I think you want to go to the farmer's market, go to the supermarket and get fresh tomatoes. Now, I am typically pretty adamant about using fresh ingredients. However, with tomatoes, it's one of those ingredients that I do make an exception for, and I am totally fine with using canned tomatoes. Why? Because typically, if you find a good organic brand, and I don't like promoting brands, but I will say that Muir Glen is a really good organic tomato brand that I use often. With this brand and with other good quality tomato brands that are organic, what they do is they will harvest the tomatoes at their ripe of peakness, and then they immediately process them so that they're really flavorful. They have a lot of the nutrient density. As you know, in our industrialized food system, you can get anything from any part of the world at any time of the year. You can get strawberries in the dead of winter. I think that in accordance with this idea of eating sustainably, we need to think about the traditional ways in which people have eaten, which is seasonally. You know, understanding the wisdom of the earth. Obviously, during the the winter months, the earth is producing more grounding things like root vegetables and tubers, and that's what we should be eating, things that are warming and grounding as we're staying in, as we're preparing for the, just to kind of be in for the winter. And during the summer, when it's hot and when we're perspiring a lot, we need things that are more hydrating, and that's when we get a lot of tomatoes and strawberries and cucumbers, these high water vegetables and produce. And so I think a part of eating sustainably is listening to Mother Nature and eating in season. So I'm going to add some peanut butter. Yeah, I think this is peanut butter. This is peanut butter, but peanut butter, almond butter, cashew butter. One of the important ingredients of this this dish is some type of fat. Now, I do understand that a lot of people have tree nut allergies, so if you can't eat peanuts, you certainly can use any other type of nut butter. But we need, in addition to the olive oil, which gives it some fat and some depth, this peanut butter or whatever nut butter you choose to use is going to give it so much more depth and make it more filling. So we add our peanut butter, and we stir it to mix it thoroughly. And we'll add a little bit of the tofu, or whatever your protein choice is. And then we want to add our stock. So if you can boil a pot of water, you can make this dish. Now, one of the keys to being efficient in the kitchen, which I should have talked about earlier, is being organized. Now, as you saw, there were all the ingredients that were kind of in their separate containers. All the spices were in their little ramekins. And, in the culinary world, in the food world, this is called the mise en place, which is French for everything in its place. Now, I promise you, I'm not trying to be fancy and chefy when encouraging you to do this. What I want to do is to help you to be a more efficient home cook. So even before you think about cooking or prepping anything, I recommend that you read the recipe thoroughly. That being said, I hope that eventually you don't need recipes. And I know I'm going to run myself out of business by saying this, but I think the goal is that you should be so adept at cooking and have the fundamental skills that you are using what Verna Smart Grosvenor, the anthropologist and author and actress, calls vibrational cooking, where you're using your intuition in the spirit of jazz improvisation. You're using what's on hand. You're just kind of flowing. And then, on that note, the recipe actually calls for mustard greens, a staple in American Southern cooking, but mustard greens weren't available. So the culinary team here actually gave me collard greens. And this really leads to my contention that, recipes should be used as a guide. If you're growing collards or Swiss chard at home and the recipe calls for mustard greens, by no means, please don't go out and buy this leafy green. Use what's on hand. And I think that goes for whatever ingredients. If you don't have peanut butter and you have cashew butter at home, use that instead. So it's really about making these recipes work for each individual and their family and making things as easy as possible. So we're going to add our collards or whatever leafy green one decides to add to this dish. We'll turn the heat up a little bit. And so Once we have our greens in here, that's pretty much it. We want to let this simmer over medium-low heat for maybe half an hour, and then we'd finish this off with a little cilantro, some minced jalapeno peppers or whatever pepper of your choice, and then serve it with rice, with bread, whatever starch makes sense. And it's a simple and easy dish. And this is something that you can make in bulk. You can freeze so that you can have some for now, and then you have some that will be available later. I truly hope that I've not only inspired you to think more deeply about the larger structural issues in our food system, how we all should be invested in solving these problems, because I think we're all aware that, we can think about the most historically marginalized communities, the communities on the margins, as a canary in the coal mine. What's happening with many of these communities right now, we need to understand that that's simply a foretelling of what's going to be impacting all of us. And so when I think about an issue like food justice, this is such a systemic issue. I don't expect for you all to abandon your majors and then be committed to food justice activism. But I do think that we all eat, right? We all eat in here? Yay or nay? And so we all should be concerned with creating a more healthful, just, and sustainable food system. And I think whatever talents and skills we could bring to kind of bringing us to a tipping point, we should bring those. You need chefs, you need designers, you need scholars, you need journalists. We need all hands on deck to really work towards what I would argue is one of the most important movements of the 21st century. I thank you for having me here today. I'm so excited about this commitment, this focus at Base College on food justice, and I'll see you in the afternoon at the cooking class. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Terry. I'm James Reese, Associate Dean for International Student Programs, and my closing remarks are very brief, as there are only two. First, as is traditional but very appropriate today, we all want to give you one more round of applause. Please, everyone. Since I'm closest to that bowl, I'll be able to grab it before you do. All right. Second, Dr. King was influenced and mentored at Morehouse College by Dr. Benjamin Mays. Dr. Mays, as a student at Base, graduating in 1920, sat in this chapel, incorporated lessons from his upbringing, lessons from this campus, into his mentoring of so many people, including being the primary mentor of Dr. King. Dr. Mays graduated here, as mentioned, and went on to educate thousands and millions in his work. So, for you, as you go forward today, enjoy the lessons and conversations, and enjoy the commons food, because we can't wait to get there today, right? Enjoy the lessons and conversations as you go forward today, and in celebration of this MLK Day. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here.